watch one movie for the rest of your life, what is that one movie?
One movie. Um, I'm actually gonna go with Disney's Tarzan.
Are we talking the live action or are we talking the animated? Which one are we talking
The
about here?
animated. The
The animated
animated. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a
Tarzan.
particular
Yeah.
reason why? Is there something that stands out for you?
Um, I don't know. It was my favorite movie growing up, and I always kind of pictured myself as Jane. I love spending time in the forest. Well, she's in the jungle. I like spending
Yeah.
time in the forest and befriending all the animals.
There you
So
go.
yeah,
There you go. I'm adding it to my
yeah.
watch list, and I'm telling my guests I'm letting the guests decide what movie I watch. Essentially, I'm giving them the power here. So for
Nice, nice.
those of you watching us, I am with Lizzy Gadd. She is an amazing self-portrait photographer based out of BC. When Sony approached us and they showed us her work, I said yes, let's get her on the show. Some mind-bending images. Sometimes some of the stuff that you're
Oh
creating,
shucks.
it's very cinematic and it reminds me of scenes you'd almost see out of a movie. Really epic, and we're gonna get all into that. I want to first start off with how you got into self-portrait photography. You created a genre for yourself. I don't want to say you invented the genre. You can say that, but it's one of these things that you really defined and you've sort of built your own style. So how did you get into this?
Well, I got into it 11 years ago. I joined Flickr, and well, actually, I joined Flickr like 13 years ago, but it was about 11 years ago I started making friends on there that were taking self portraits. They were all around the world and all about my age. I was 15 at the time, I think. Uh, and they were doing these projects that were called the 365 projects, where they were taking a self portrait every day. And we all became like really good friends, and we were inspiring each other and encouraging each other. And before that point, I had been into photography for 2 or 3 years already, taking photos of nature and landscapes, animals, which has always been my first love, landscapes and nature. But I realized then, being inspired by my friends that I was making on there, I wanted to step out of my comfort zone and try something new. So I thought maybe I'll try this self portrait thing. And I was homeschooled growing up, so I had my parents encouraged me to spend a lot of my time being creative. So I had lots of time on my hands to do exactly that, be creative.
Yeah.
So I decided to take on this 365 project of taking one self portrait every single day for a year, because I thought that would be the best way. I knew at that point that I wanted to be a photographer, and I knew that I needed to keep pushing myself and learning new things. And because self portraits were so outside of my comfort zone, I thought this would be a great challenge, and to have the support of all the friends I was making on Flickr as well. So I did that, and I had no idea, like, I didn't have a style or anything. I was just
Right, right.
playing, taking self portraits every day, uh, playing around with editing every day. And it was literally in the last week of that project, I never missed a single day. So every day for a year,
So we're
I took
looking
a
at
photo.
358 days. So that there's 1 week left here, right?
358 days of experimenting and taking self portraits that
Yeah.
all drastically ranged throughout the year in style and whatever. But yeah, the last week well, throughout the year I started like taking more and more in nature, but it was the very last week when I started going further out into the mountains and combining like wider landscapes with me in them. And
Right.
it was in the end, on the very last day, I thought when I was done with this project, I was going to be like, that's it for self portraits. I'm done. That was a good challenge, but it's not really for me. But it was on the last day when I went out to some of my favorite mountains. It was about minus 10 degrees, and there was a lake. And I walked out on these rocks into the lake, which were very slick, covered with ice. And I did slip into the lake
Oh,
at one
jeez.
point. I was
Oh,
wearing
jeez.
a dress, and got the dress got wet to about my knees, and then it froze immediately after, so it was like
Oh my
cardboard around
goodness.
my knees. But when I was out there, it was so cold, but I didn't really feel it when I was taking the photos, and I was out there posing on the rocks and just trying to be like part of nature, like trying to get that across. And it was that moment on that very last day of the project that I realized how much I loved, like, my first love of landscapes, and
Yeah.
how much I loved portraying that that peace and stillness that I find when I'm in those landscapes. And then I realized that I could get that across through the self-portraits that I'm doing in nature. So on that last day, I was like, wait a minute, I think I want to keep doing self-portraits, but do it in, like, this is my new style now, combining my knowledge of how to do self-portraits now with my biggest love of landscapes and nature. So ever since that day, which was just over 10 years ago now, I've been doing that.
I mean, that's remarkable, and it's almost serendipitous in a way, but it's like you don't get there unless you put in the first 358 days.
Yeah.
We're actually going
Exactly,
through that
yeah.
process. And I'm just trying to imagine falling into a lake, you're just getting frozen, and it's like that's when you have that aha moment. This is exactly it. So, I mean, listen, we're on a half an hour conversation. I'd love to ask way more questions about the last 10 years, but let's talk about the theme. Over those 10 years, how did you look to sort of develop your style, and how did you know you were on the right track? What were some of the things along the way that guided you in the right direction that ultimately led to the visual style that you have right now?
Well, I I decided to just keep doing what I loved, which was spending time in nature. And I decided that first and foremost, like the 365 project, the goal of that was to take a photo every day. But then after that, I knew what I loved to do, and I decided first and foremost, when I go out into nature, I want to enjoy being in nature. In photography, even though I love that to just being in nature.
Right,
So
right.
when I came to that realization, instead of feeling pressured, like every time I went out, I was like, oh, I need to make a decent photo. I decided that I would always bring my camera gear along, but it's very rare that I have a photo planned ahead of time. I just enjoy going for these long hikes, backpacking trips, or just being in these beautiful places, and the inspiration comes to me when I'm there. So I never really had like a plan, like seeing ahead, like how I wanted to keep developing these photos. Instead, it was just a day by day thing where every day or every few days I'd be in nature and taking these photos and having fun with it.
Right.
And I didn't even realize how much I was progressing in how my style was developing and my editing skills and everything. It's every couple of years I would look back to the previous photos I took, and I would see the leap in skill that I had
Yeah.
acquired.
Yeah.
So there was like never once that I realized that I was getting better in that moment. It was just always looking back and being like, oh wow, I've actually come a long ways.
So it's almost one of these things where you're just focused on the process, where you're constantly just looking to
Yeah.
keep going, keep shooting, keep iterating over time, and then, maybe planned or unplanned, you might look at some of the older images and look back and be like, damn, that's
Yeah.
quite a bit of growth for me, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
And looking at how you iterated and how you got better in your eyes when you were looking to sort of develop, what were the things that you were sort of doing strategically? Was it more sketching? Was it more pre-production? Was it better scouting? How did you look to, in your eyes, get better?
Ooh. Honestly, I think it was just I just kept going out there and enjoying my surroundings, and there were a few times when, like I said before, it's very rare that I had like photo ideas in mind. It was all I would just go be out there, let the inspiration come to me, and create while I'm out there. There were a couple of times that I had seen a location and thought, wow, this would be great for a photo, but I would prefer if it was like foggier or moodier or something. So then I
Yeah.
start developing sort of an idea, and there's a couple of photos that I have where I had this image in mind, and it took me a couple of years to actually execute that photo, going back to that location multiple times in different weathers and trying to get the right weather. And eventually, a couple of years later, for these two particular photos I have in mind, I was able to get what I had.
Wow.
Yeah, but I think, uh, yeah, it's mostly, I've never really planned much. I'm just out there and
Yeah.
just let it come to me.
Amazing, amazing. And one of the things, obviously, as soon as I called you, is I noticed you have some nice portraits behind you, some of your work up behind you.
Yes.
And I ask this as a creator myself, and maybe a lot of people that are creators can empathize with this, is sometimes looking at your own work and being proud enough of your own work to put it out there, whether it's prints, whether it's to sell, whatever it may be, getting over that hump can be challenging for some people. In your eyes, when did you feel like, I am proud of this, I am ready to print this, put this up, and ask people to buy it? When did you get to that point?
I think I got to that point about 4 or 5 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, and I realized that I had always enjoyed taking my photos, and yeah, about 4 or 5 years ago, it's not. I'm proud of my work, but not in like, oh yeah, my work is the best. I'm just happy that for me, all of my work that I've created, I love being able to share it with other people, but for me, it's all come like from what I'm feeling. So it's very much
Right.
like putting myself in my work and my feelings in my work and how I connect to nature in my work. And that's, I don't know, that's what I feel when I take these photos and I edit them. It feels very much like they're a part of me. And I really like seeing, my connection with nature and just seeing that in photo
Nice.
form. So yeah, I feel quite
Nice.
content with,
Nice.
yeah.
And I'm gonna talk about the gear because obviously you use a select kit of gear to capture all this kind of stuff. I want to start with this though. In your eyes, how long does it take for an image to be done? Once you've captured it, once you're in the field and you've got that image, and you come back, when do you?
When I take the photo until completely done being processed and posted, on average, it would probably take 4 or 5 hours. I like to
Okay.
take my time with editing photos. Usually I'll wait like a few days, I'll do some editing, and then I'll leave it be. I'll come back the next day and be like, no, I don't like that. And then
Yeah,
I'll
yeah, yeah, yeah.
start over. Yeah, but I never really like to edit my photos like very much. I like to bring out what's already there to the best potential it has. Like I won't add things into photos or take things out unless there's a distracting rock or something that's in the way or
Yeah, yeah.
but I just love playing with the lighting and the tones and bringing that out to the best potential that it can have, that it already had in the photo but just was it didn't come across, or that it had in real life but didn't come across in the photo when I took the photo. So yeah, doing that, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist when I work on my photos, so it can take a while before I'm completely happy with them.
Personally, I
uh,
love hearing that because I'm of someone that likes to take my sweet time
mhm.
editing, and I will edit to the last available hour, minute,
Yep.
and it's always fascinating, learning about other people's processes. Where some people they just don't want to edit; they just want to get it out as fast as possible and keep it as raw as
Yeah.
possible. But for others, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for others, it's really almost you're working with clay in a way, and you're kind of pulling the
Yeah.
image from the raw data that you've captured, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I love the whole editing process, and the shooting process, but the editing process, I just love getting home into my office here, lighting some
Yeah.
candles, putting on music, and I'll just go in the zone. And it's super therapeutic to me to just slowly like draw out the colors and the light and everything in the photos until I'm happy with it. And
You know
I
what?
love
You
that.
you mentioned candles, and you know what? I just realized my office is missing some candles, so I'm gonna get
Oh,
some candles. All right, we got music, we got nice lighting, but we definitely need
yeah,
some
you gotta get
candles.
those candles.
I want to talk about the gear because, listen, to capture the image that you capture, that is an important part of it as well. And you made a choice. It's not like Sony just came to you at the beginning and said, "Hey, take our gear." You made a
Mhm.
choice to shoot with Sony. So,
Yeah.
what's in your kit? What sort of your critical cameras, lenses that you use to capture the images that you're capturing?
I use my favorite camera is the Sony A7R3. I love that
Ooh,
camera. Um,
yeah.
yeah, the details in those photos, it's like 42 megapixel photos, so it's definitely, that's also one reason why it takes me a while to edit, because they're so huge that it takes a
Yeah.
while for my editing programs to keep up with processing. But the level of details in those photos is amazing, and I love that. So yeah, the Sony A7R3. And my go-to lens is the Sony's 24 to 70 millimeter 2.8. I probably use that lens for about half of my photos for the last couple of years. I've only had that lens for 2 years.
Right.
But I also, before I had that lens, I would use the 50 millimeter 1.4 a lot. I also use the 85 millimeter 1.4, and I also have a 135 1.4, I believe. Yeah.
Nice. And you kind of answered it with the resolution, but looking at Sony, why did you choose that product? What ultimately led you to use that for the images that you were trying to capture?
I switched to Sony. I was gonna say 4 years ago, but maybe it was longer ago. I don't know.
Yeah.
Time flies. But before that, I was shooting on a small Canon camera.
Yeah.
I had never shot on a full frame camera before, which I love Sony. I'm so glad that I switched to Sony, but I also want to say for people who think that they need the best gear to create photos, some of the photos behind me were shot on my old, not good Canon camera, which just goes to show it, good gear really helps bring up the quality of photos.
Right.
But also you can, if you're passionate, you know what you're doing, you can use anything to create art.
Definitely.
But I switched to Sony because I started, the main reason was I started backpacking a lot more, going on multi-day camping trips. And I wanted a new full-frame camera, but that was lighter. And so when I switched to Sony, I think my first Sony camera was the A7S, and it was just so small.
Yeah.
And easy to use and fun and better quality than my previous camera. So I had that, and then I had the A7R2, and then switched to the A7R3. And now with the lenses that I have, it's kind of added more weight again, but I fell in love with the cameras from the beginning. Yeah, and they're just, I don't know, lighter weight, easier to travel around, backpack with, and I love the quality of them, and it just all works for me.
Yeah, the
So
A7R3, the A7R3 was my first Sony full frame camera, and it was one of those things where it's a balance between resolution, portability, and really some advanced features, right? Like you get a little bit of everything, especially when you come from, I don't know if you've used DSLRs in your time, but when you come from a DSLR to that, it is quite a jump, and the ability to get, again, those 42 megapixel images in that package on the go is pretty astounding.
It really is, yeah.
And you mentioned 3 lenses, and I got to ask you this question. If you could only keep one of those lenses to capture the images that you're capturing, what is that one lens and why?
The 24 to 70, because it has the most range, I guess. I love shooting wide when I'm in the forest, but I also love being able to zoom in on the mountains and everything as well. So that's, like I said before, I use that probably for about half of my photos. So I think that would be the safest lens if I could only use one.
Gotcha.
That would be it.
Okay. I feel like that was a very safe answer. I felt like that was the one you were going to go with. No problem at all. I want to talk about your process. And guys, before I continue, listen, if you go to henrys.com, for any of the gear that we're talking about, you can go to henrys.com. We have it available there. You can price compare. And also, if you go between Monday to Friday, 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern, if you have questions about gear, we have a live chat feature. So you can talk to one of our associates and get your questions answered. With that shameless plug out of the way, I want to talk to Lizzy about your editing process. So let's say you go out there, you get this beautiful image. In your eyes, it has all the sort of ingredients to make for a really compelling image. You bring it back, you throw it into what program, and what is sort of your editing process at a high level?
I edit 90% of my photos in Lightroom, Adobe Lightroom.
Gotcha.
I will sometimes use Photoshop only for if I'm stitching photos together, or a few other effects, but mostly Photoshop is beyond me. Every time I go in there, I forget how to do anything. So One day I'm going to learn it, which maybe I should do that now while we're all on lockdown. That would be a great
Right,
idea.
yeah.
Yeah. But for the most part, I use Lightroom because I started using Lightroom 10 years ago, and it was straightforward, easy enough for me to learn. And even to this day, like this year, I've realized there's still things in Lightroom that I never knew before that my friends have showed me. And I was like, wow, that's going to make my process so much easier. So there's still
Yeah.
always things that I'm learning. But yeah, I've been using Lightroom for 10 years, and I find it works. It's the easiest way for me to play with the colors, the lighting. Once I bring a photo into it, I usually I'll like add in some contrast right away and boost up the light or take it down depending what the photo needs. And then I think one of the two of the biggest things that I like to play around with in my photos is the radial filter, or however you say that.
Radial filter, yeah, yeah.
Yes, the radial filter. I love using that to add some vignetting, or I'll like put a few in the photo and bring in colors and light through that.
Oh,
Kind of
okay,
hard to
okay.
explain, but I love using that. It adds more mood to my photos. And then I also do a lot of with the brushes. I guess painting, I would call it. Which before I got
Oh,
into photography, I was always like drawing and painting. So I kind of feel like it brings me back to my roots in that. But for playing with the colors, like say I'm wearing a dress in one of my photos, and
right.
all of my dresses are really ugly if you see them up close. They're faded and colored, torn, grass stains, dirt, muddied,
You want
wrinkly.
behind the scenes,
Um,
folks? Listen, Lizzie's giving you behind the scenes. She's giving you complete honesty right now,
my
okay?
dresses are so ugly. But when I bring them into Lightroom, I'll take the brush tool and like say for I have a couple gold dresses that are not gold anymore. They're like super faded to an ugly brown.
Hmm.
And when I take the paintbrush tool and I'll kind of brush over it, and I'm able to adjust the colors. I can paint like gold into it, and I can make the colors stronger or desaturate it, or I can make it brighter or darker. So I do that a lot, and not just with the dresses, but say if there's patches of grass, if I want all the grass in a photo to be green, but there's some more patches of yellowy grass, I'll take the brush and kind of make the yellowy more green.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, I love playing with the color. Color is a huge part of my love for photos. I don't know if I could ever shoot black and white photos. I love color too much.
But I mean, that's really cool. Lightroom's amazing because it's one of those applications that you can quickly get up and running with. It's not that
Yeah,
intimidating,
yeah.
and it's just one of the things where you can kind of go through the tools one by one. It's laid out in a pretty systematic way. But you've taken it a step further with select filters, and I'm guessing like masking certain areas and
Mhm.
really localizing your edits, your color adjustments, your exposure adjustments to
Yeah, yeah.
essentially paint an image. It's really like you're almost painting on a digital canvas in a way.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. And
And
I love it. It's all like a therapeutic process for me, just painting away, listening to
yeah,
my music, drinking my tea.
there you go. And one thing I want to talk to you about is sort of like, you had this process, you developed it over years, and then
Mhm,
eventually, Instagram comes around and you sort of start, I would imagine you move like myself from Flickr to Instagram, and Instagram
mhm,
starts getting more attention, and you've cultivated a pretty sizable audience there as well. Has
mhm.
Instagram ever pressured you in a way to speed up your work or change your work in a certain way? Like, I want to know, as a creator, what's your relationship with Instagram and how do you manage that?
Yeah, I joined Instagram in the early days when it was just everybody was just taking selfies. Nobody even thought to upload photography.
Yeah.
And but then I realized that I could actually take my photos from Flickr and start putting them on Instagram pretty early on. So I gained a following quite a bit earlier than most people who are on Instagram.
Right, right,
And
right.
but then as it started getting more and more popular, and these styles of photos started coming up more, people adventuring in nature, and it's all super cool. But I did feel really pressured because everybody was is like very important to them to like post every single day, and then I was like, oh, should I be doing this too? So yeah, the last several years have been kind of a learning process for me, in realizing that I don't need to keep up with what like the normal is on Instagram.
Yeah.
I can post whenever I want. I would rather take my time with a photo, pour my heart into it, do what I love, and post it when it's ready instead of just going out and getting a shot and posting it every day. So I've realized now that Instagram, for me, it's been an amazing tool of friendships,
Yeah.
being able to connect with people, and I don't care anymore like how much work I can produce and put out there. I just use it to, if I have new work, I'll share it, but otherwise I'll use it to be inspired by the friends and artists that I follow on there, and to be a part of a community and help build other people up, and yeah, just gain inspiration and be inspired.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
I want to wrap it up on this, and I should say, guys, if you have any questions, last minute questions, please drop them in the chat. But when we jump over to Instagram, I mean, that's your chance to ask questions, and we have our friends from Sony that are going to be on Instagram with us answering questions as well. I want to ask you sort of your process over time. You've built this into a business for yourself. This is your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And we're gonna mention where people can support your work, but it's not always, sunshine and rainbows. There's ups and downs to this thing, right?
Yeah,
what are
for
some
sure.
of the things that you kind of had to go through, and why was it important to ensure that you kept your art, your creativity going as long as possible into this day?
Well, definitely, like several years ago when I started making money off of my self-portraits and like licensing photos to be used on book covers and album covers and stuff like that. And I thought like, oh, this is a great way to make a living. But then with that comes like there's ups and downs. Like there's a few really good months and then a few months where I make nothing at all. So
Right.
I also shoot. I do side jobs shooting portraits for people or shooting company products. But even sometimes that runs really slow as well. It really ranges from month to month. So I
Right.
realized like this year over the winter, everything kind of stopped, and I ended up picking up a job packing tools in a tool office and
No
woodworking
way.
tools. Yeah, and at first I was like, I don't want to do this. I feel like I'm losing what I set out to do. I wanted to be a full-time photographer.
Right.
But then I realized when I started doing that, it was actually like a blessing in a weird form, because I tend to go through a lot of creative ruts, especially when I can't be making money and I don't have that inspiration and no money's coming in and I don't know what to do. But then working the side job, packing woodworking tools, I knew that I had like that money was coming in from there. And then all of a sudden, when I had the rest of the week free to do photos, there was no pressure there to make money off of those photos. So it became purely
Right.
a passion, love thing, doing the self portrait thing again. And then I realized how much that I love that. There's no shame in picking up a second job if you have to. It's more important to me to be able to love, create from my heart and not feel pressured by that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's one of the things where people might start taking pictures for the love of it, then they get their new camera, and then they get insta famous, and they turn it into a business, and then all of a sudden it becomes more of a business than what it started off as, and that can create
Yeah.
some pressures on it, and maybe even shift the artwork. So I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate the humility, because I think people need to hear that, right? In whatever
For
it
sure.
is,
Yeah.
remember why you got into it and why you started.
Exactly.
Amazing, amazing. Guys, for those of you watching, thank you so much for tuning in. It's not done yet. We're actually going to jump over to Instagram Live, and we're going to do a Q&A there. But before we go, Lizzy, how can people support your work? Can they see more of your work and really support your journey?
You can find my work on Instagram, of course, which is just Elizabeth Gadd. Gadd spelled Gadd. And on my website, elizabethgadd.com. And I also created a Patreon page this month where I'll be sharing editing tutorials and tips and tricks, behind the scenes photos. And that is patreon.com/ElizabethGadd, where you can
Nice.
subscribe for a monthly fee of whatever you're choosing. Could be $1, whichever. And then
Nice.
I share my knowledge with you. Woo.
Amazing. Again, you know, when we're talking about how you actually take those 4 or 5 hours and create these images, guys, if you want to know, I mean, she told you where to find the source. There it is. Elizabeth, thank you so much. We're going to jump over to Instagram. And again, for those of you watching Henry's camera on Instagram, you can see our live conversations there where you guys can participate. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you over there.